As retailers entered the lockdown in March 2020, a small, diverse group of Canadian thought leaders gathered to virtually speculate, collaborate, and share their insights on the waves of disruption facing retailers. The Business of Retail podcast emerged as an unflinching strategic alternative to the conventional discourse, revealing challenges in the headlines and exploring new, unconventional paths for all facets of the retail industry. Now, here's the panel.
Hi, and welcome to the Business of Retail podcast. I'm Christine Cowan. Joined with me is David Ian Gray, George Minikakis, Gary Newbury, and Craig Patterson. And today our topic is the future of independent retail and why it matters.
I think this is a really important topic that our group has circled around off and on last year, but we haven't built into the podcast yet. And, I think when we talk about the retail industry, we can't help but talk about big chains. We start with the biggest, we talk about specialty chains, but en masse, collectively, independent retail stores and even more importantly, independent food service and restaurants collectively make up a tremendous amount of retail operations and food operations here in Canada. And they have a very unique situation that they're encountering right now because the business model isn't set up for any kind of prolonged downturn in the same way that a public company might be, or someone else who can tap some equity. So if you, with permission from the group, I'd like to run a clip, and this is something we put together through a really talented producer and director named Jessica Fraser, alongside an iconic Vancouver-based small independent retailer with 2 locations, incredibly respected in the community, and would have been successful, not being knocked out by Amazon and the like, but would have been around a long time, except for the dictates of the pandemic. And we can get into that a little bit later, but there's a video we'd like to run right now.
When I started Lala's, I was just turning 30 years old. And I had this feeling inside of me that I want to make money, I want to be successful, and I don't want any ceiling to my success. There's all these studies about what makes an entrepreneur, what makes a small business owner. I think it's just not wanting to be led, but to lead. Today is the last day of a 25-year career. It feels like a breakup. It feels like I'm in a breakup with Lala's because it's such a big part of me. I have friends' kids who call me Lala. They don't call me by my name. And I'm nervous about that separation. With the news that was coming that we needed to physically distance from one another, we needed to reduce the number of visitors in our stores, I took it upon myself to close long before other people were closing businesses because the local community was at jeopardy. I went into planning mode very quickly. The only course of action that I had was to determine how long I could manage having both locations closed. We had lost $140,000 in sales, and I had incurred personal debt of $75,000 with the way that sales were not rebounding. The strategic plan just was showing me that I wouldn't be able to make it. It was just a massive heartbreak. My customers have been amazing. I'm at every turn. Obviously, you can tell we're a little light on product, but everything's 70 off. Having to have the conversations with them around why I'm closing have been very emotional, and at the same time trying so hard to be expressive in how it's happening and why it's happening and how they can stop the next business from going has been difficult, to say the least. Being a small business owner means that you're a part not just of your business, but you're a part of your community. Small businesses are the life of streetscapes as we know it. They drive a community in such a beautiful way. They create spaces where people can come and enjoy food, services, retail spaces. There's an ability to get connected. We're going to have a lot more businesses not be able to work themselves through winter. The streetscapes are going to change, and that's going to be a detriment. I'm feeling a sense of urgency to help everybody who's sticking around. I implore upon everybody and anybody that's going to be so much harder now, so much harder, but shop local. Make sure that you're doing it for all of us.
That's a powerful statement, and I think we can get into the emotional toll on an individual like Christina, but I think as a strategic group, what's I think really important is the fact that that's one story out of so many, and what I'd like to explore today a little bit is the ripple effects. If the projections are true and that many disappear from our streetscapes, how do we unpack that, and what are the implications for all retail and our communities? And I think I'd like to just set up with the premise that in any given year, you're going to have independent retail that doesn't make it, right? Every year there's churn with street front indie retail for various reasons. And, there's a lot of retail that wasn't navigating the modernization of the sector very well, who probably would have gone anyway. And there are those who, did quite well in 2020 and might in 2021. Like if you had a bike shop last year, you might have been thinking of shutting that down a couple of years ago. Well, last year might have been your best year you ever had. Mm-hmm. But I think we're talking about the ones here who are doing the right things. They're good business owners. They know their customer base. They're providing value add. And through the dictates of the pandemic, from landlords who just said, we're going after your money no matter what, all the way through to restrictive closures, especially in Ontario now, that may not be fair in the scheme of things with vis-a-vis the Costco's and the Walmarts. Is there something that might be done to mitigate the depth of this, and regardless, what are the implications? So I'll kind of hand it over now to the.
Yeah, could I just chip in quickly? The kind of amazing thing, and almost as a backdrop to this, besides the thing at the end, I think it was Dan Kelly's champion that 225,000 somewhere in that small businesses could disappear. Now, I think it's worth remembering, and George kind of did this research, if we put aside the public sector, that 70% of the employment in Canada is in small to mid-sized businesses. If those businesses, particularly the small ones, who just take on an extra person, if there's 100, 200,000 of those, and they all just took on another person, suddenly maybe coming out of the situation that we're all in, we fixed our problem in terms of economic growth. but if those businesses aren't there to just to take on an extra person each store, we're in some serious trouble, and we need to think very deeply about what does that really mean, both for our society, but more particularly as retail, for the strategies that we need to have in place to allow us to move forward. If the stars align and we're in the category that is still here after the situation, which may not be the case if we just started our business in restaurants, travel, these ones that have really been apparel, been really seriously hit during this the last year.
We need a we need a soft landing for a hard start, because that's what's going to happen. We always have a soft landing. We try to create a soft landing for banks and for jobs and everything, but I think I'm going to say that I believe the number of businesses that are on the cusp of failure is much higher. Not everybody's forthcoming with what their situation is. So, the number is probably significantly more. And if this year is more challenging or as challenging as last year, you're going to see a lot of businesses that are squeezed already. They probably drained their finances last year or are close to it, and they're heading into a tougher year this year. And the problem with all of this on a personal level, dreams are being destroyed, right? You get up every morning, grew up as a kid in a family business. My parents got up every morning because they had a passion for what they did, right? They believed in what they were doing and that they were adding value in some way and sharing their dream of what the world would be like with people who friends and people they considered friends who were shoppers, right? You're not just losing a business, you're losing a whole community. That's the tough part for a lot of these independent retailers or businesses, restaurateurs, whatever they're doing. Very, very difficult, and that's why I think the government needs to create a soft landing for what's going to be a hard start. And I'm not sure what that's going to entail. Giving them cushions right now to help them through this period is fine. But to start with the startup and the timeline between the startup for these businesses and the public, their timeline that they feel confident and have enough trust to get back outside and do their normal routines or new routines, whatever that is, that gap alone could take months. And that's why I really believe the government needs to intervene and say, we're going to provide these businesses with a soft start. I don't know what that's going to be. Is it money in the hands of the public to make sure that they spend it? Well, that's, I don't know how well that goes over, right? But you need to do something to kickstart this, because it's not just going to start on its own.
Well, and George, I think one of the issues, I've had so many calls from indie owners, and often they're not looking for a solution. They just need to vent. And a lot of it was early on. It's quieter now. I think they're just numb. But the real issue was they didn't have any confidence that the institutions around them, when the watchword was, we're all in this together, they didn't have any feeling that between banks, landlords, and especially the government really understood or cared about we're all in this together.
Yep.
And when you look at, and most recently with the government's handling of the rent situation was incredibly mismanaged, but even those who got through it are left feeling like nobody's got our backs. So now you've got in a publicly traded world, or even a corporate world, you've got your retained earnings, you've got finances that could draw down, but you keep your livelihood separate. In many cases, these are family businesses, and so they're watching their livelihood drain away, which could be their kids' education or their retirement. And the faith that they should stay in it, even if they're doing the right things and treading the water, I think the toll that that they're taking in terms of the mental pressure is incredible. And it's different from a corporate manager. It's different from, a CEO of a specialty chain.
Yes. And there's a whole bunch of different types of small businesses out there that are collectively contributing to an economy, to a society, to cultures, to just a fun day out. All these things are evaporating. And when people do come out, their favorite ice cream shop may be gone. Their restaurant may be gone. But I have to be very critical of a lot of bankers. I'm going to be critical of the economists. I hear nonsense as far as I'm concerned about all this pent up demand that they expect, and they're expecting the public to take their savings that they probably pulled together because they're worried about the future. And if somebody from the government side listening to this, I'd love to invite them to one of our episodes and help us understand what else they're going to do if the public doesn't come out with their savings to spend it. And what if the banks at the opening say, hey, we want our money, we want to be paid by these retailers or operators that, your mortgage is due on your home, you're overdue there, you're overdue on your business loan. What are you going to do to help them? Because you've helped a lot of larger institutions in the past.
Yeah.
Right. And you should consider retailing and the restaurant industry as one institution that needs to be saved.
Craig, what are you seeing? You just have such a great lens on street fronts.
Where to begin? I had a call this week, yesterday, with one of the people at Richter who was saying that they're expecting absolutely mass bankruptcies in February and March, small and big retailers, but we're focusing on small today. Just given that stores are opening, some are waiting to clear things out. It's been incredibly challenging. You've got a situation where you've got retailers that have obligations such as rent. You've got landlords that in some cases are not budging on that. The parties can't come together. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm certainly worried. I'm worried about retail, but when you look at food service, there was a group out there that said they expect more than 50% of their restaurant members to be shutting down, which is mind blowing. But at the same time, I know there's been a real push to move online, but this has been, I think, a challenge for some retailers, because in certain parts of the country, as we're in a lockdown, really the only way to get to consumers is online. You can get them to come to your store to pick something up, but they can't come into your store, which in itself, of course, is a challenge.
Unless you're Costco.
Right.
Well, yeah, the non-essential, which in itself I think is an insulting classification for a retailer. Every retailer is essential to the retailer, to the operators, the mom and pops who own it. And we've got governments that are basically deeming some retailers to be, it sounds like, more important than others. Doug Ford has the phone number for the head of Walmart Canada, but isn't talking to the small retailers in the same way. And lo and behold, the big retailers are open and the small ones aren't. I would feel safer going to a local store that has precautions and I'm in there shopping one-on-one than I would waiting in line to get into a big box store that might be crowded inside as well to go shopping. I know the odd time I pop into stores in my neighborhood and I'm quite sure they're not taking any tally of who's in there. I was in a small Korean store called H Mart, which had way too many people. I left the store. I went in there. A friend wanted to pick up a couple of things, and I was just like, I can't be in here. It's too crowded. It just doesn't make sense. The stores that are open, I don't think are doing it right. A substantial portion of the retailers that were inspected over the weekend were fined because they weren't adhering to protocol. So you've got these big retailers that are allowed to stay open. You've got these small retailers that probably would have done it better, forced to close. So we're going to have basically this obliteration of a significant percentage of smaller businesses here in Canada, retailers, food service, and fitness, just because governments think that maybe this is a good idea in terms of keeping case counts down. But I think they're doing it wrong. It's probably something completely unrelated. It's probably international travel and all the people going out and partying when they shouldn't be. And retailers, unfortunately, I think are going to suffer as a result. And this is a catastrophe if you think about it. I don't know how Canada is going to recover in 2022.
Yeah, and out in BC, it's been a little bit different because we haven't had the enforced full lockdown. I will say this, that when I've gone into smaller stores, owner operated, you can tell that they are paranoid of the potential being locked down. Like they're just so careful. And we're, as shoppers, we're often not making it easy for them, right? Like we're in a rush. They want 6 people in the store and you're doing a little hedging. Well, they won't notice the 7th. And, we're putting them in a very awkward position, but same with the larger guys too. I just think you can blend into a superstore a little bit easier, and it doesn't seem to have the same, like you say, prescription around it. Now, I'm not trying to pit part of the sector against another part, but we are talking about independent today. Christine, in Portland, one thing I want to just lead in before talking to Christine about Portland is the notion that I think Gary mentioned communities. Gastown in Vancouver is a place that I have a lot of affinity for. I was there when it was transitioning into a really cool neighborhood, and I love the place. It doesn't feel good to be there right now, and a big part of that is the boarded up street fronts, and even if every third one has someone viable that's still in there, the overall feel is not what it was, and that's leading to graffiti. It's leading to sort of more open vandalism and drug use, and that's my segue, because Christine, you've been dealing with that in Portland, not just from the pandemic, but from the Black Lives Matter protests, etc. How's that getting dealt with there, and what's the feel like at street level?
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, we've definitely had challenges here. Absolutely. Oregon as a state has a significant percentage of small business in the community. So, I mean, I think 55% of Oregon's workers work in small businesses, and they define that as 500 employees or less. And, the downtown core, it's very challenging. They've been boarded up. There's the graffiti. There is kind of a beauty to some of the graffiti. So some of the stores, the higher end stores like Tiffany, they hired artists to come and do murals. So they're trying to kind of make a bad situation look a little bit better. But it's definitely challenging. I think it has sort of calmed down to some degree. So a lot of the stores on the extraneous part of the downtown have started to kind of open up again and are less boarded up. But it's tragic to watch that video and see and know that there are every single day businesses here that are closing, and some of them have been restaurants that have been around for 20 plus years, famous restaurants that have been written up in Food and Wine and that are well known globally, and amazing chefs that are closing their doors up. And you're seeing small independent retailers that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years shutting down. So it's a real tragedy. I do think the independents are, in what I've seen, a lot more on the ball with having sanitizer, controlling how many people are coming in. If someone's not wearing a mask properly, they're actually going to that person and saying, no, you've got to have the mask covering your face. So I think they're a lot more concerned about that. And, back to the big box conversation, I mean, going into Costco, there's no sanitizer. There's a million people in there. There's shopping carts all over. I was in the one in Richmond over Christmas, and you've got someone yelling, keep your social distance in the store. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, you can't keep your social distance when you've got that many people and their shopping carts and everybody's in a frenzy, like doing their shopping. So, I do think, Oregon and Portland in particular, what I love about Portland is it has some incredible small businesses and some really incredible shops and restaurants here, and some great little communities, not to the same scale as, a Toronto, but I'd hearken it to some of the neighborhoods in Vancouver where you've got Kerrisdale and you've got your little shops and restaurants in Kerrisdale, or you go to other areas of the city, Forth, et cetera. And, I worry for these small businesses, and I worry for the community, back to what George said, because now we're sort of in this situation where we don't have that ability to just go as freely as maybe we would before, out into the streets, shopping in those places. But there's also a creativity that's come into play. So we're seeing a couple small businesses where they're taking on a storefront and doing a collective, which I think is really interesting. And we're also seeing a lot of street restaurants where they've now, restaurants that are on street fronts where they've actually created, like there was a really cool one down at a restaurant that we like to go to, and they created a wooden structure and had a heat lamp, and they had their doors open and a guy playing guitar. So they're making the best of it. Obviously in the West Coast, we're able to do that. It's not as snowy as it is on the East Coast, but people are trying to get creative and doing things to enhance people coming back and feeling comfortable and safe. There's tents out on the streets, they're closing streets off, they're trying to do what they can for small business. But, you know, it's really, really sad. Like every single day, there's another retailer that I follow that's shutting their doors down, whether it's a consignment shop or a local, you know, really cool fashion boutiques, that type of thing. So it's heart-wrenching, and it's been a brutal year, especially here with all of the, you know, social unrest that's happened. So you add that on top of a pandemic, on top of, you know, just the challenges for people to begin with. It's really sad. So
the ask I would have of any of us who gets interviewed by the media, the thing that really outrages me is an insinuation that it's the fault of that owner for not adapting. And I guarantee there's going to be examples you can find of that. And in any year, as I said earlier, any year there's going to be churn, and not every independent retailer is a good retailer. We know that, but it's not inherently their fault. Like if you do Chinese food, you could probably adapt to takeout. But if you do French food and it's going to sit and take 30 minutes to get somewhere, it's not going to work. So that's one thing. And the second is I've seen people say, hey, these are entrepreneurs, so there's going to be opportunities opening up on the other side of this. They're exhausted and they're gutted and they don't have the finances. So what you're doing is you're taking an entrepreneurial class of experienced entrepreneurs out. And I do find we'll find our way back. We will eventually, but let's be realistic about it.
I think.
Well, one of the restaurants down here, I think I've talked about it before, Naomi Pomeroy, who does Beast, had to really shift her business. I mean, it's a small, amazing restaurant. They had to shut down. Now they've turned it into like a cooperative. So you can go in there and get takeaway food and pasta and things like that. And there's a lot of stores that are trying to do that. Another one has a well-known pizza, high-end pizza place. Now they're selling pre-made pizza in the frozen section at a local grocery store. So there are examples of that, but then there's other examples where people cannot afford the rents, they can't afford to staff. They've shut down. We've seen a lot of businesses here shut down end of December, and they're not going to open up until, you know, March, April, if they can survive it, and if their landlords are going to give them some kind of relief. But yeah, it's a tough one, because I'm really passionate about small business. I'm passionate about entrepreneurial opportunities that are out there, and I think it brings a breadth to us. I mean, there's nothing wrong with mall-based shops and with the big box, but we need the small businesses. We need that creativity, and all those small businesses eventually, as they grow, become the bigger businesses that we see now. So they're the incubator for the future. And if we don't support that, and if we don't build on that, we're going to have a sea of big box stores and nothing left to show for it.
Yeah, I think there's a real danger here that brilliant things that where the guys who haven't lost it yet are still confident that they can get through this, twisting and turning and adapting, reinventing, and all those things they can do on a small scale under their control, and deliver that into marketplace are incredible stories. We've got a whole population that's going to lose heart. We've got people coming through school, through university, who their first job will be in the old world, a part-time, like I did, in retail, filling shelves at weekends, in the evenings or whatever. What are they going to see in this situation? Is it worth them becoming the next Zuckerberg, some kind of concept in retail? Or are they just going to say, is this what we've got to look forward to? Is this the environment we're going to have to face up to if there's another serious pandemic or some other kind of ailment to humans? Why bother? And we have the entrepreneurs who will have seen their whole livelihood slip through their fingers. Are they? We imagine that most of them, well, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm just going to get on and do it. But there'd be many of them who say this could happen again. And why would I spend the next 10, 15 years building up a business for an intervention by the government to lock my business down and drain me out again? Where's my pension? So I think there's a really big impact in here, which we're not actually talking about yet generally, and we haven't really quite touched on yet, and we've only got a short period of time to get a whole range of things going on here.
Gary,
But
you're
David,
so right,
David-
though, but we're not collectively talking about the scale of it in the tight time frame we're talking about. And I think that's really the key. Like, it's so important to talk about the individual examples, but it's not about them. It's about the magnitude in a very, very fast evolutionary time frame gone.
But-
And it's going to affect everything.
David, you made a mention of this, and it kind of made me stutter a little bit in some ways, because you said small retailers are absolutely essential for the whole retail industry.
Yeah.
And I thought you just meant in terms of like things like employment, sales and all that lot. But I wonder, when you scratch the surface on your statement, you mentioned a thing about critical mass. What is the level of independent retail or small retailing that has to be there for the big retailers to benefit from? Because if they pretty much disappear, okay, you've got your big box store, and Christine made this point, but what's the alternative? The Amazon? Is that a big box or Amazon? Is that what it's going to boil down to?
Well, but Gary, let's do a little scenario. Let's just a little scenario playing here. We do know, I think we all agree that, we're not going to see the sunshine until 2022 sometime.
Yeah. So,
right? Unfortunately. But if that gets delayed even further, right? The fallout on the consumer, right, is going to perpetuate more failures. But the consumer, I mean, there you have two groups losing here. You have more retailers losing, and then you have consumers losing, because the retailers that are left, there is no incentive. There will be no need for them to actually discount anything, right?
No.
They will be aggressive in their pricing. This is what we're paying, we demand. So you can see the lower income and lower middle income part of the economy struggle because of this. And they're the ones that are working in these small businesses. If this domino effect starts and it takes longer, you see a domino effect of people losing jobs. And then all of a sudden you see things getting even worse. Again, I'm going to put the onus on government and say it's time to be transparent with the public and show us what the plan is to get out of this. And it's every country. It's not just Canada. Show us the plan to get out of this, because I'm worried that we're not seeing the whole picture. Every day I turn on the radio, somebody's got something to say to me, or TV, we're going to get out of this. If you're still telling me in June that, the vaccines are coming, then I say it's time for some serious thinking about changing whatever the plan is, because it's not going to work. There are people, I'm not going to get into other issues, but, get on with this, get on with the vaccinations, get on with helping small businesses, and give trust and confidence to the consumer, the public, that they can get back to their normal lives faster than what you're predicting. Because if it takes longer, the longer this hangs out, more businesses are going to fail. And I don't believe, and I just close it off here for myself, all these businesses that fail, if anyone thinks that someone's going to rush back in to open up shop, you're kidding yourself. Because the banks will have eaten so much bad debt, they're not going to have the appetite to help anyone unless you've got cash. And who with cash is going to want to open up a small business?
And I don't understand we need to get some landlords on the show at some point, because I'd like to understand the thinking way back in March, April, when you took the hammer to your tenants. Did you really think them leaving, you'd be able to replace them down the road at the same lease terms? Like, wouldn't it be better to just proactively say, hey, we're going to give you a number of months, we're here for you, with the idea that you're going to keep on that old lease, we're not going to renegotiate that. And now if they're getting hammered by the banks, maybe so. Like, there's the whole trickle down effect that it all points back to the banks eventually. But I think it's more than the government, though. I think if you're a technology firm, if you're vendors, like the ripple effect here too is a lot of, we always want local product. Well, local product tends to go to smaller independent stores. They often can't produce at the volume or at the cost structure that the big guys take on. So they're going to be impacted by this. But how are you working with the retailers? And, you know, all the way through the technology guys that serve them, are you offering up free service for the next while? Because if you don't, if half of the restaurants are gone, that's half of the restaurant openings that are, you know, storefronts that are going to not need POS systems. It's hard. It's daunting to see how all the pieces fit together on this, but it's going to be big.
But it seems to me that much of the discussion is like short term. It's about the virus, the vaccine, or it's something that people can get their mind on and get their arms around as such. Yeah, I can understand that. But when we start looking at these concertina effects, or, you know, the cascading effect of that falls over, so that falls over, that falls over. And this is, you know, I don't think people are thinking that big about this problem, and therefore we're minimizing. I think as a society, as you know, in government, wherever, that we're kind of minimizing the problem because we're so focused on the short term. And it's very much, this is very much a almost a retail thing that, you know, retailers think about the next quarter. And I think that wider, we're thinking about, you know, the vaccine, the case count, and all these things that we've perhaps touched on before. We're not actually thinking it. And George assumes, I mean, there is a plan. I'm not convinced there is a plan here, back where I come from, because I follow that side very, very closely. And there seems to be a clear case that I don't think there is a plan. I think they're just get the vaccine done and somehow magically it all goes away. We've just got, you know, $300 or $400 billion worth of debt. Don't worry about it. The interest rate's low. So, you know, as long as we generate growth, maybe that's a big plan. Our growth would be higher than the interest rate. Job done. It's fixed. It's not fixed. It's not fixed by any stretch of imagination. And we should be having interventions now, as George mentioned, as we kicked off, about what is the government going to do to help now to make sure these the good businesses that have survived so far do actually survive and start to get into a position of success as soon as possible.
Well, this is obviously a topic that we are all very passionate about, and I'm sure there'll be more conversation to come. Any sort of parting thoughts from the group before we sign off?
Well, sir, and maybe just to take Gary's lead, is there something that, you know, is there a bit of a solution to this? And obviously, a lot are going to go, but Christine, do you think some of this can be mitigated? Is it too late?
I mean, I think it's going to take a lot of creativity and collaboration. And I think you're going to see some of these small independents collaborating a lot more. I'm on an organization called Built Oregon, and it supports local Oregon-based businesses, a lot of BIPOC businesses. So they're even more challenged. But there is a lot of work around being collaborative, these businesses helping each other out, sharing best practices, often working together. So I think, you know, whether it's coalitions for small business or groups starting to pull together to figure out common ways through it, or potentially larger retailers or larger organizations coming in and helping, and whether that, you know, is a possibility or not, I'm not sure. I would like to think that we want to save as many small businesses as we can, and that there's going to be some hope around the corner, but I don't know. I mean, with the closures we've seen, part of it is a cleaning up, but at the same time, I think we need these businesses to continue the community and the you know, the infrastructure of the cities that we live in, and they're so vital to our success. And so you know, again, I don't know the answer, but I know that for many of my friends and myself, our focus is really on shopping as much as we can local. Our Christmas shopping was all done local. So it's just getting that word out and really focusing as much as we can on those independents that we love.
Craig, how about you? Can it be mitigated?
I really hope so. I'm wondering if municipalities could at least play somewhat of a role, perhaps supported by higher levels of government, because when I'm forecasting, you know, I look at cities and places, and I try to look at the big picture. And what I'm quite terrified of actually is the emptying out of neighborhoods, because we as consumers, we react to our environment. And if a place has a lot of vacancies, like David, you mentioned Gastown, if a place has, a lot of boarded up storefronts, it's not a place that appears to be desirable, and therefore we as consumers are going to, or just as humans, are going to react to that. Do we want to go to this particular neighborhood or this street or this strip plaza or this enclosed shopping center? We're seeing more independents moving into shopping centers. I mentioned this earlier about percentage rent with some malls in Canada. But my fear is that even if we have successful small retailers on streets or in certain parts of our communities, people may not necessarily want to go to those locations if there are a lot of other vacancies there, because that area may not be hot anymore. David, you and I worked on a project on a street in Vancouver that was already struggling. This was a few years before the pandemic, but we saw places like Robson Street, which traditionally is a very popular street in Vancouver, start losing tenants, and foot traffic was going down. People were talking about it, and I think that's going to play out around the country. I think that's quite scary. And one of the biggest costs that retailers have on streets, besides obviously the base rent, is the additionals, which include property taxes, which in some cases can be almost prohibitive for businesses. So I don't yet know what the solutions would be. I'm personally, glad I'm not in a government position where I have to make these decisions, because clearly, I don't have the knowledge or, to be able to save small retail. But I just identify the issues, and I'm personally very concerned, because I still think physical retail is important, especially for independents. Not everything you're going to do is going to be online. Some people make impulse purchases. It's a different dynamic, and it's going to be an interesting couple of years, I think. And not to be, a Debbie Downer or whatever you want to call it, but the reality, I think, is we're going to see our communities change, and we're going to see a lot of businesses shut down. And I think that, it's going to be tough. I mean, we can be as optimistic as we want. I talked to a lot of optimistic business owners, but in the end, the reality is I think we're in for a major shakeup, and things are going to get better in a few years, unfortunately.
Well, and if you are a really good global chain, national chain, but you're in a really hip neighborhood alongside these independents and they're all closed, you're done, right? I think that's your point. One shout out to the municipalities. Why the hell do I go downtown Vancouver and I have to pay exorbitant parking? It should be free parking right now on the street.
Yeah.
So that's a whole other thing. George, can it be mitigated?
I have one word that I made up the last few days ago, and it's called fixalopoly. And basically, it doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to make sure it does. Maybe this podcast will help. But basically, it's a bunch, fixers with very sloppy ideas who have no sense of what the problem really is, and they're going to try and institute things that are going to backfire. That's my worry. So we're going to get a fixalopoly, and someone's going to take credit for it. That somehow it may have worked, but only because they've spent money. If you're going to do anything right, find, you may have to do a lot of due diligence. Find the businesses that are going to survive, and I'm being, now I'm being picky. Find the businesses that are going to survive. Who've got runway. Help those out, and if you help them out, then in some way, even the weaker ones might be able to pick up steam because you're bringing in traffic. But otherwise, I don't like being a pessimist, but I need to see something concrete more than I'm seeing right now.
Gary, is there hope in 2021 for the ones that are still standing street front?
Yeah, George, fixalopoly.
I'll send it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll have to look that up in the dictionary and see if I can deconstruct it. And it's etymology on it. It's epistology. I having said the government needs to do more things, how many times do I know when any government has actually positively impacted in something and had a really positive result? And we're in the hands, not only were we in the hands of a whole bunch of consumers who have been locked in their homes and probably won't rebound, won't have that, call it revenge spending, the V shape. We actually probably have a whole series of governments, municipality, regional, provincial, federal, that are all going to get in the way, frankly. They may have the money, but how they apply it may not be very helpful.
Can I throw one last one in, which is, I'd like to see when MEC was in its heyday, go back 10 years, at its flagships in various cities, it would have clusters of little independent outdoor stores around them. And talking to the people at MEC, they said that was good for their business. It wasn't nibbling away. It actually brought people to them, and they all did quite well. And so I'd like to see some of the bigger retailers think, maybe there's some business case that we can offer up, maybe excess warehousing or some where they have a little extra. Maybe they can put a program in place. I know they're slammed as well. So that's one thought. I'd love to see the Microsofts and, writ large, all of Shopify, all those guys kind of say, look, if we got some capacity, let's donate something here. Let's put some talent to their talent. I don't want to save poor performers if there are those who are going to go out of business anyway, but we're talking about the ones that are viable otherwise.
Great conversation today. I want to thank everyone. This is the Business of Retail. David Ian Gray, George Minikakis, Craig Patterson, Gary Newbury, and myself, Christine Cowan. Thank you.
You have been listening to the Business of Retail podcast, an unflinching strategic alternative to the conventional industry discourse. Thank you for joining us. For more information, please go to www.thebusinessofretail.ca.